Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1959 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Simone Signoret won for her performance in Room at the Top. But why did she beat fellow nominees Doris Day, Audrey Hepburn, Katharine Hepburn, and Elizabeth Taylor? We'll explore all this and more today on the season finale of And the Runner-Up Is. Hello and welcome back to the season finale of And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 32nd year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1959. We'll be discussing why Simone Signoret won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest today is a great friend. He's been on the show for the Best Picture series, where we discussed Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. A very fun episode. He's joined me for some bonus episodes talking about Capote and JFK and all that jazz. Great mix there, too. Co-host of this had Oscar buzz. He's written for places like Vanity Fair, The Daily Beast, Gawker, Polygon. Please welcome back to the show, Chris Feil.
I'm entering this episode from an elevator in the ceiling.
Of course.
And then I'm like, let me take you through my funeral garden.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me back.
Oh, I had to have you for this particular episode.
I felt insanely flattered to be given this episode as well. So I'm very excited to talk about these.
Yes. And we get a rare double film nominee here. In the sense that we have Katharine Hepburn and Elizabeth Taylor from the same film. That's only happened 5 times, so...
Listen, all you have to do to get the double Best Actress nomination is apparently have Ridley Scott or Joseph Mankiewicz direct your movie.
That's what it takes, people, so...
Who else am I missing? Obviously, Thelma and Louise being the last one, correct?
Yes.
And then we have
like
this and All About Eve for Mankiewicz.
And The Turning Point.
Oh, The Turning Point, of course.
Yes. Who could forget? Shirley MacLaine's done it twice.
That's
her impact.
Right. In terms of endearment, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Neither of those Shirley MacLaine ones would ever happen today. They would be forcing somebody into supporting, and it's
a crime.
Travesty for all the obvious reasons.
Yep. And I will just note here, should have been Cate Blanchett and Rooney Mara, but... another discussion for another day.
We agree.
Yes.
You have several decades to build up to this.
Yes, that's coming. But yes, before we talk 1959, let's talk about Best Actress as a category. So my first question for you, Chris, what is your favorite Best Actress win of all time? I think I already know this.
Longtime listeners know how
Yes.
I feel about Elizabeth Taylor in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. I think it is the greatest screen performance of all time, let alone the best Actress winner of all time. And I'm slowly chipping away at the Mike Nichols book in a way that I feel like I just never want it to be out of my life, and I want to be able to pick it up and read a page of it at a time. Until there is no more book, and then I will shuffle off this mortal coil. But I just got past through the Virginia Woolf stuff, too. And, Liz Taylor doesn't factor huge in those portions because Mike Nichols' life is so interesting, especially at that kind of turning point in his career. But even more so, every nugget of discussing her performance in there just reaffirms my belief that it is the greatest of all time.
Yeah. We'll be getting to that performance very, very soon. Only in like 7 years from now here. Not in podcast time, but in episode time. So very, very excited for that pinnacle of Elizabeth Taylor's career going out on top.
To listen.
Yes. Well, my other question for you is, what would you say is your most heartbreaking loss in Best Actress?
I mean, I feel like there are some of the obvious ones which, I talk a lot about Angela Bassett in What's Love Got to Do with
Yes.
It, even though as the movie has gone on and especially after the Tina Turner documentary, like, you can still have complicated feelings, I think, about that movie, which has a lot of inaccuracies that were very damaging personally to Tina Turner,
Mm-hmm.
psychologically, while still thinking Angela Bassett is amazing. I also feel somewhat similarly about Bette Midler and The Rose, but neither of them are my answer, and maybe this is just me progressing on in my 30s, and like the movie that I feel like is the movie of my 30s and would be my answer here, and it's Jill Clayburgh in An Unmarried Woman. Just
Yes.
one of my favorite movies, one of my favorite performances. She loses to Jane Fonda, who's winning her second, which we don't want to take anything away from Jane Fonda ever. She is one of the angels on this earth, but I don't feel like we really talk about coming home in terms of discussing Jane Fonda's career, so I think it's
No.
fine to, want to pass that off to Jill Clayburgh. Plus, it's also an incredible lineup that I think she's doing something that nobody else is doing in that lineup too. Just a performance that feels so right in my sweet spot of what my taste is, and
That's true. Yeah.
what I'm constantly seeking out and never able to find. Just her ability to play this woman who the movie doesn't overplay its hand in like where it existed in the culture and like what divorce was at that time, especially for divorce of women of a certain age, but it is kind of, it's about that. Listen, if I'm gonna do one thing in my time on this earth, it's going to be stump for a performance about a woman self-actualizing.
Yes, of course.
That's what I'm here.
That's really a lot of what you do on this at Oscar Buzz.
I mean, yeah, that's just what I do at the grocery store. It's what I do if I go for a morning jog. That's
Yeah, you're never off the clock when it comes to that.
No.
So, yes, I love that performance as well. It came up in the 1956 episode where my guest Morgan also said that was her most heartbreaking loss. So, can't disagree there. I also love Ingrid Bergman from that lineup. I'm very excited to get to that lineup as well. I don't know if I've talked about this before, but one of my favorite parts of that Jill Clayburgh performance is that the film explicitly actually mentions Jane Fonda in the film.
100%, which is very funny. They also were at the same Cannes where Jill Clayburgh won Best Actress, tying with my favorite actress, Isabelle Huppert.
Yes. I'm surprised you didn't say her as a heartbreaking loss, I suppose.
I mean, Elle seems to be the one for a lot of people. It's not the one for me, though. I'm so happy, obviously, that the nomination happened.
Right.
I mean, if she was nominated for Things to Come that year, maybe I would have had a different answer. But yeah, Jill Clayburgh's in an amazing lineup in that one, and I think she's so amazing that she gets nominated the very next year for Starting Over, where she's incredible again, but I don't care for that movie. But yeah, also Geraldine Page. I haven't seen the Ellen Burstyn performance this year.
Yeah, that's the only one I haven't seen.
Yeah.
Well, excellent. Very excited to get to, all the lineups that you've mentioned there. And I'm very excited to talk about this one in particular, a very unique lineup that we have here of a lot of big leading lady stars of the day, shall we say. So let's get right to it. The 32nd Academy Awards Best Actress nominees were Doris Day for Pillow Talk, Audrey Hepburn for The Nun Story, Katharine Hepburn for Suddenly Last Summer, Simone Signoret for Room at the Top, and Elizabeth Taylor for Suddenly Last Summer, with the winner being Simone Signoret. So before we break down these performances on that individual level, would love to know your thoughts just from watching these 4 films in particular over the past few days.
It's a good lineup. Just on a performance level, I think for the most part they're on pretty even footing. I didn't really feel like there's a stinker in this lineup.
Yeah.
I'm sure maybe some listeners will disagree. The movies I don't quite agree with. I have a very clear favorite among these movies. But like, and also just like some of the movies maybe I don't particularly age very well, but it does feel very representative of where the movie industry was at the time. So that's kind of exciting. And these are all, I mean, it's interesting that the winner is maybe the least firmly planted in like movie loving lexicon,
Yeah.
because the rest are four like very iconic heavy hitters, and which is of course nothing against Simone Signoret, but being that she's the winner here, it gives you a little bit more opportunity to talk about her. Because it's four other actresses who might have otherwise gobbled up all the attention.
Right. Yeah, I very much co-sign all of that. I actually really love this lineup. I don't think there's a bad performance or even a mediocre performance in the bunch.
Right.
Just a really fun group to watch for the most part. A very starry group, as we're saying, where we have Doris Day here, the top box office star of her day, getting her first and only nomination in a film that, generally speaking, we'll talk about it, but you wouldn't naturally think of it as an Academy-friendly movie, per se. And then we have Audrey Hepburn, Katharine Hepburn, Elizabeth Taylor, all Academy favorites getting, additional nominations here. All of them would eventually get at least 5 nominations, so huge favorites. And yeah, like you said, what I love is that the least known of the 5 up to that point, and probably even now, Simone Signoret is the big winner and just kind of comes up the middle maybe. And I'm excited to explore just how that happened, because it's very rare that we get a performance like that. Also from her, someone who isn't as known as the rest, and yet also is giving probably the more understated performance of the 5, somehow wins. So let's just jump right into it, shall we?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we're going in alphabetical order as we always do, and we're starting with a fun one. Let's talk Doris Day in Pillow Talk. So, as we're saying, Doris Day was considered like a very huge, very popular star of the 50s. She was a major box office force. She was the girl next door image, which made her very appealing for men and women. She was a singer. She was in all kinds of films, but she was largely considered sort of the good girl, the girl next door type. And even though a film like Pillow Talk is maybe tame by today's standards, it was a bit of a risk for her to take on a film that is speaking somewhat frankly for the time period about sex. And this is her first collaboration with my man Rock Hudson, which proved to be a very winning combination, I think. And both of them were actually voted the top box office stars of the previous year, and obviously it became a big hit seeing them together here. So Pillow Talk, it's a romantic comedy. Haven't had one of these in a while in Best Actress, so I'm happy about that. And
there won't be many more to come.
I know, right? I'll take it while I still can. And it's about this interior designer named Jan, played by Doris Day, who's a very successful career woman living in New York City. And she shares a phone line with a guy named Brad, played by Rock Hudson, who's a songwriter, perpetual bachelor. She's often hearing him wooing various women on the phone by singing them a song that has the same melody except changing out the name depending on who it is. So the two of them are very much opposites. It's the classic sort of setup there, and they are always bickering on the phone about sharing this phone line until one day he finally sees Jan in the flesh, and he's like, oh, interesting. And he decides to just make up a persona as a southern gentleman named Rex, and he sweeps her off her feet, and she has no idea. He keeps up the ruse. Hijinks ensue. For those who have seen Down with Love or You've Got Mail, similar vibes in terms of the dynamic. All the gaslighting and such is here. So
to the point that Ewan McGregor's alter ego in Down with Love just has this ridiculous southern accent as well.
Exactly. Right. Very direct homage there. So let's talk Doris Day. Would love to know if you had any thoughts on Doris Day, just like as a screen performer, and this being her one and only nomination.
I love this movie. I know that people are like, people kind of cringe when they watch some of it because of the datedness. I almost kind of appreciate it for its frankness in calling out some of the culture at the time. Instead of that, because like you could say that there are full-on rape jokes in this movie, but it's also saying that these men are all pigs, while you know, being rather frank, or as frank as they could, about this, you know, what was true in the culture, for what the limitations were with what you could say or not say. We'll get into that with at least one other movie at this time. And like, it was interesting because this is almost the most frank of any of these movies that we're talking about, and it's still so funny. I'm not a huge Doris Day person, but she is so incredibly charming in this movie. And, you know, it's not easy to play the character that is set up to be such a fuddy-duddy almost, but then we actually are charmed by her, are rooting for her, are on her side. And I think that speaks largely to what a charming performer she is. And it's interesting that a comedy performance got through this lineup too, because it's also the same year as Marilyn Monroe not getting nominated for Some Like It Hot, correct?
Yep. Very
So
famously.
I mean, which, like, if Marilyn Monroe was here, she probably would be my choice for a winner, but
probably same.
I do think that, you know, rather than that being a dig against Doris Day, I do think it shows the amount of prowess that she has here in, you know, capturing what the tone of this movie is supposed to be and making the movie succeed at the level that it does. I'm less surprised by her nomination. Her nomination is surprising just because of, you know, the lack of, especially the further on you get in history, the lack of comedy nominations that would happen. Right. But like, the movie as a whole was embraced pretty well by the Academy, including winning original screenplay.
Yeah. We got Thelma.
So happy for that Thelma Ritter nomination. Listen, if Thelma Ritter says, let's go get drunk, let's go get day drunk in the middle of the day, you absolutely go.
You do.
Yeah, I mean, this is just such a fun movie. There's a reason why it's a classic. I think, you know, there's a reason why people maybe cringe at it too, but I think it's smarter than just being dubbed some outdated comedy.
Yeah, there are far worse from this particular time period. So.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I think it knows what it's doing.
Yes, very much. It is quite winky right from the start with the very, very catchy title theme song.
Yeah.
Which is still in my head. Same thing with another song that's later in the film.
Absolutely.
But I think Doris Day is a great example of making something very difficult look very easy. And I think that can sometimes be confused for lack of skill or not being taken seriously as a really good actress, when she really was. And she was surprisingly adaptable, I think, to comedy and drama and thrillers. And she was obviously great as a movie star and a kind of media personality just by being likable and winning. And she has this kind of infectious smile. But she was more complicated than the kind of simple good girl image that she was packaged as.
100%.
And I do think it takes a lot of skill to be able to adapt to exactly what a film needs, and also trying to preserve your own public image, you know?
Yeah.
And this is definitely pushing the limits a little bit into something more adult and, you know, sexier, but I think she does it without really missing a beat. Like, the role itself is pretty reactive, and she is kind of the straight man in the whole, you know, because there's so much wacky antics going on around her. And so it's just a testament to her personality and her popularity that she was able to get this Oscar nomination for a kind of light romantic comedy where she's not even really the driving force comedically. You know, you have Rock Hudson taking on this different identity and being kind of like this goofy Cary Grant type of role. You have, you know, Thelma Ritter, like we said, being the comic relief, the clutch hitter. And for Doris, she just kind of has to be the straight man, more or less, to all this the madness happening around her. But at the same time, she kind of holds it together, and it's
And
really
she's
tricky.
no less funny for playing the straight man too, which I think is pretty rare.
Right.
You know, she gets to still make us laugh too.
She has her moments, right. And she also doesn't dumb down the character, which I like, even though she has to have like some kind of naivete with this whole like Rex situation. But she sort of honors the fact that this character is taking pride in her work, and she's able to make the arc of her hating this guy to then being charmed by the southern version of this guy to then realizing what's happening and hating him again, but back to loving him again.
Redesigning his apartment horrendously.
Which is a moment. I love that. But it's like, despite the more dicey elements of the plot, as you were maybe alluding to from a modern perspective, she's able to make it feel authentic to how this character would be feeling along the way. And again, she makes it look really easy because she's been a star for so long at this point that it's just kind of like innate within her probably at this point. But it's like Julia Roberts doing another rom-com in the 90s. Like, she's going to give the audience what they want, and she just delivers on what they expect from her, but also giving it a little more of an edge, which is probably what propelled her to a nomination, maybe.
I mean, I think, you're talking about an era, too, where that popularity actually could translate, especially within the studio system, to nominations, even if not always to proof like this. Right. So, like, that does probably help her.
I was also reading about the behind-the-scenes making of Pillow Talk, and apparently Rock Hudson was very nervous to be doing a role like this, but that she really helped him. Like, she offered to really be on the other end of the many phone call scenes in this film, where it easily could have just been, like, an assistant reading her lines, but she just, like, went above and beyond, and I think it helped to build his confidence and their chemistry, and they got along really well from what I've read. They had all these like hangouts and gatherings together, and I think you can see just from watching them here, there's just such a easy chemistry that it's kind of astonishing that this was their first time working together, because it's so easy and so quick between them.
I think this one gets such prominence when discussing their screen partnership that alone kind of makes it surprising that it's the first time, especially when you're watching it, because like you said, that ease is just really there, or that seeming ease, everything's just really clicking. It's also interesting to discuss for Rock Hudson, also because if we're talking about it in an Oscar context, it's so sad that he wasn't nominated, because he is also wonderful in this movie too.
He's great.
But so I mean, one of the ways we view this movie through a modern lens is how it's kind of, at least to us, seemingly obvious that it is winking at the fact that Rock Hudson was gay in real life throughout a lot of this, and the idea of performance for this character that he's playing. And obviously he would essentially perform a very all-American male in his stardom as well. Looping that kind of back to Doris Day, I think, because that's something that gets talked about with this movie so much in a modern context, the fact that she doesn't get completely lost along all of that is another tribute to how well she is, how strong of a performance she's giving.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what I just took note of just from watching this again is the attack of her voice sometimes, if that makes sense. Like, it really carries. Like, it's so pronounced and forceful and feisty, kind of in a Meg Ryan sort of way, perhaps down the line. And yet is able to, again, walk that line of still being charming at the same time, even in the darker moments of the film. Like, there's one point where she goes to a party for a client, and the client's son comes around and has to drive her home, and he kind of forces himself on her, and she's kind of struggling to stave him off, and he tries to take advantage of her, and the way she just kind of fights back is just so, like I said, it's just, there's something very forceful and compelling about her screen presence that even in a darker moment like that, you feel like, yes, like you go, Doris Day.
Well, and this is kind of, this like scene specifically is one of the ones that I meant in terms of like the movie knew what it was doing, and I think the movie was presenting a certain aspect of the culture that was overlooked, and even if it's doing so comedically, it's saying this is bad and we side with this woman.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'm curious what you think of just how she performs the naivete of, the whole ruse of Brad being Rex, and she just has no idea. How do you think she handles that aspect of the performance, like the entire middle portion?
It's really difficult to make a movie, make a comedy specifically like this and not completely lose it into complete farce. And
Right.
I think that level of control is a lot in her performance, because she is playing an intelligent woman. She is playing a sophisticated woman. It's not like they pull a fast one over on this, dumb broad, as, they might have put it then. She makes it believable that the comedic stakes are real, but she's not like leaning into the fact that the character doesn't catch on to it right away in a way that would make her seem, or make the character dumb.
Yeah, that's how I felt as well. And I think while she's doing that, she's also showing that she is someone who has been through, presumably, some dates with guys that have always gone wrong in some way, and that's why she's decided to just focus on her career. And she makes these allusions to dating other guys in the past. And then here comes this guy who's this great Southern gentleman who doesn't take advantage of her at first.
Doesn't want to have sex with her.
Right. To the point that, again, we have him kind of like suggesting, oh, maybe he's one of these guys who loves his mother a little too much.
Yeah, loves gossip.
Loves gossip and trading recipes and stuff.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, more on that later when we get to another film. Weird how there's like weird parallel storylines a little bit going on here.
Absolutely.
I think she's sort of showing like, I can finally be comfortable and happy. And then I love the moment where she becomes on guard when he asks her to come up to his hotel room with him, because she's like, oh, okay, well, here it comes. This is what this was all just leading to. He just wants to get in my pants. And then she kind of softens again once they get up there, when he's like, oh, like he said he wanted to go up and get his coat, and that's exactly what we're doing. He's not like using this as a ruse to take advantage of me. So it's just like this mini arc that plays out on her face of just something that I think probably a lot of, women of the 50s have had to deal with. And obviously that's not something that's unique to the 50s, but I think that's a smart element to the film that really puts you in the mind of what it's like to be a woman in the 50s and dealing with men like this. So I give credit to the film and to her performance for being sort of in sync in that way.
100%.
I just want to point out, even though it's not having anything to do with acting, the bathtub scene is very hot.
Yeah, me and who? Like, fully.
Me and who? Lots of great editing with them sort of matching in when their feet touch in the two frames.
Uh-huh. I also love the like kind of, what do you even call this? I'm gonna sound so stupid, but like the crossfades, the type of thing where you see them like walking in place, but it's also overlaid with like shots of the city. I live for that in any movie, and they're
always
very
a sucker for that. Yes, and like, oh, it's the Statue of Liberty.
Yeah.
Yes.
Pointing and looking.
Yes. Even though they're just like walking on a treadmill, probably.
I mean, really, this is what she got the Oscar nomination for. That type of montage acting, the pinnacle of the form.
Harder than you think. And probably the same thing for telephone acting. Just saying. This is kind of the blueprint.
Exactly.
you could say.
Exactly.
Let's see, what else is there? I mean, by the end, I think she gets a little more dramatic material to work with, where she heads off to Connecticut with him, where, by the way, I didn't mention that Brad is a Broadway musical writer. So let's
And
just leave
somehow
that
that's
there.
not a
Right.
euphemism.
Somehow,
Everything else
right.
is a euphemism, but not that.
Exactly. But I love the very convoluted sort of way that she finds out who he really is, which is finding his sheet music and then playing it on the piano and then realizing, oh, and some great classic Doris Day shocked face in that moment. Just like very sitcom-y, but also really nails that particular scene. And just kind of like her breaking down and just like sobbing in the car. Just really, really great classic rom-com stuff that definitely influenced things to come. Do you have anything else to note on this performance?
Love it. We'll be watching it again in the future. Maybe I will double feature it with Down with Love, since it's so intentionally parallel.
Yes, exactly. I think even if this is a performance that doesn't quite reach the dramatic heights of the other performances that we'll talk about, I think it's just as valuable to reward performances like this of people who are really at the top of their game, which Doris Day really was at this point in her career. And I'm glad that she got at least this one nomination to show like a little bit of a marker of her being such a talent at this particular time. So, all right, shall we move on to our next nominee?
Let's.
All right, to a very different film. Audrey Hepburn in The Nun's Story, the story of a nun. Here we go. So this is Audrey's third Oscar nomination out of 5, so we're right in the middle. And I think it's appropriate that this is right in the middle for her, because I do think it represents a turning point in her career. She's obviously an Oscar winner at this point, but generally speaking, I don't know if she was taken as seriously as a lot of her fellow Oscar-winning actresses were at that time. She'd done a lot of lighter films, comedies, romantic films, films that really emphasize her looks and her charms and just, you know, her femininity. But this is really one of her first films that she really dove headfirst into creating a complex human being who really lived a life. And in the process of that, I would argue she proved that she could contend with those, you know, more powerful actresses. So this was based on a novel, The Nun's Story, which is very popular. And the novel was somewhat based on the experiences of a real former nun who was close with the author. So it's very rich with specific detail in that respect. And it tells the story of Gabby Vandermaal, a Belgian woman who decided to join a convent and become a nurse. So she has to adapt to their very strict rules. They change her name to Sister Luke. She doesn't always agree with their rules, but she hopes that eventually she can go to help the natives in the Congo. But the convent kind of tries to humble her, and they make her work at a mental institution at first. Then she finally gets to go to the Congo, but she's only able to treat like the white European people there. She works with a doctor played by Peter Finch, who she often has conflicts with. And all along the way, it's like this test for her of trying to help people and do what she thinks is best, and also struggling with the confines of being a nun and just all the things that are put in place that she doesn't always agree with. So let's talk about it, Chris. Thoughts on the legendary Audrey Hepburn and her performance here?
Listen, before Beyonce and Big Frida said release your job, Audrey Hepburn said release your job.
The blueprint, right?
Exactly. This is the type of movie that it's this like mid-century big studio movie making, you know, back when that like meant something. You could discern what a big giant studio movie was.
Yeah.
That obviously is coming from a popular novel, but it felt, in watching it, it felt quite bloated to me compared to what it was, in a way that every time I felt that way about it, it was when it was kind of steering somewhat away from the lead character and towards like the bigger canvas of it. And I think that Hepburn's performance is definitely the most interesting thing about it. I maybe a half hour into the movie, I was like, oh no, this is going to be a lot. But I found her really compelling, and I think just as a performer, she's way stronger than people give her credit for to this day. I even think of the type of gravitas she can carry and the type of like understated human emotional truth that she can portray. I mean, the final scene of this movie is so good.
Oh my God,
and it all fully just like hinges on her very specific but like not flashy physicality and how compelling it is. And like you mentioned beforehand, the way that she was probably perceived at the time, I think, is also still how she's perceived. That like her charm is the thing that's so compelling about her. Her particular like way of phrasing and her like tone of voice is like what compels people to her. But I think that there's so much more than that, and this movie's a really good example of that, even if I wasn't in love with the story or this like very kind of almost dated feeling storytelling. That being said, this is like one of her biggest hits, right?
Yeah.
Which is part of the, I mean, like, this is a Best Picture nominee.
It gets like 9 nominations. It didn't win anything.
Yeah.
It's one of those goose eggs. But
conceivably the type of movie that was second place in a lot of other categories.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe even this one. We'll talk about it later on.
Yeah, because I fully had no idea what this movie really even was. Like, I knew it as, like, the title of a movie.
I mean,
and
the title's right there.
Yeah, exactly that. Because like it's the type of thing we don't talk about it, and when you watch it, you can see why we don't talk about it, even if the performance is really strong and worth talking about.
Yes, agreed. Well, I've mentioned on the show before, I love Audrey. She's one of a kind, and this is such a pivotal role for her. I think that she took a lot of pride in. And she was so invested in so many aspects of the production. This is another one I read about, and she really studied the real-life subject of the novel. She learned from the nuns. She did her own firsthand research. She even got involved in some of the crafting of the screenplay. She was actually kind of instrumental in striking the right tone for the ending, which I think is another credit to her perception, her very right perception of this story. And she fully committed to getting it right. And I think a big part of that is her recognizing herself in this role of Sister Luke and this sort of ongoing spiritual conflict and this journey with, seeing the hardships in the world and wanting to do something about it, but also feeling constrained, and holding on to your values and having integrity and with yourself, all those things I think really appealed to her about this role, and it shows in the performance. It's just one of those performances for me where by the end I don't see play acting. I see Audrey as this woman and kind of having like a weird sort of symbiosis with Audrey and Sister Luke kind of combining, and we do see something of that sort of wistfulness and the melancholy of the Audrey we knew before of, Roman Holiday and Sabrina. But I think here it's sort of serving a more complex story that is almost entirely internal. Like there's very little showboating here or mugging for the camera or like these sudden outbursts that let the audience be like impressed with her acting in any way. Like she's just fully in this character really from the start, and I think she's able to provide that feeling of inner turmoil and how much of a toll this is taking on her that really, at least for me, carries me through a pretty long narrative that doesn't need to be quite as long as it is. But it's like she is the movie. It's entirely on her shoulders.
People just took their time back at this time. If you're making an expensive star vehicle back then, they were like, sure, you can have 2.5 hours to tell that story.
Yeah.
Take your time. No rush.
Right. But I think it's rare for me to have a performance that is this understated and quiet, leading a film for 2.5 hours. But for me, at least, not really losing my attention with it. I think it's
Yeah.
just she is that compelling to me.
I think it goes back to that kind of physicality I
Yeah.
kind of fumbled in trying to describe that, like, that's what I mean. She's compelling to watch, but it's also that is what's kind of revealing this journey throughout the movie of, this kind of unquestioning faith more towards ultimately leaving the church. This movie made me think so much also of the Children's Hour, which she's in,
Yeah.
and another performance of hers that I think really shows what she can do dramatically that she doesn't get credit for, but also a movie that ends with Audrey Hepburn leaves. She says, "Enough of this, I am going away." In terms of that physicality, it really clicked into the movie and her scenes with Peter Finch, because there is... you throw a man in the mix, and of course I was thinking also of Black Narcissus, and it's like, they really just dressed men like this back then, and it's like, of course there is sexual tension with when you are a nun and there is a man dressed like that. But she has, in addition to just like, there's the scene where he has to examine her and she asks if there's another nun, and he basically says, I examined all the nuns, this is fine, this is my job, whatever. But there's like, she doesn't even move, but there's like a hesitancy in her like posture, and you can feel that tension because of just how she holds her body, that ultimately is serving the character arc as well. That's hard to describe, but it's there, and that's kind of when I really locked into the performance.
Yeah.
I did ultimately think that she's pretty incredible in this movie, even if I didn't like the movie.
Yes, well, that's something that we have a lot in Best Actress, unfortunately, but great performance, movie. I think it's a little bit better than just because of the sheer force of her performance, or I guess the lack of force in some ways. You just kind of feel yourself drawn in and like wanting to lean into the performance here. But yes, the stuff with Peter Finch, I think, is where things come a little bit more alive for her, obviously. And he has a lot of fun sort of teasing her because he's an atheist, and he kind of is mocking some of the strictures that she has to follow, like when she saves a guy's leg and there's no other doctors around, so she has to help him, and the doctor is sort of asking if she now has to confess because she's showing pride in her work, and it's just this very tense dynamic. And then we get to this other point where she's got tuberculosis, as we often have in Best Actress. Just saying that this is not the first time, nor will it be the last.
Best Actress is a tuberculosis super spreader event.
I think we need to shut this down so we can figure out what's going on. But, just to speak to not only her performance and sort of the frailty she shows, but the makeup also, I think she really does look like she's in bad shape. And the doctor just is speaking to her very plainly about how, he's worked with a lot of nuns in the past, and she's what they would call a worldly nun, which is to say that she wants to help people as much as any other nun, but she's like stubborn, and she has her own views that conflict with the church's, and she won't find that inner peace that ideally she should be striving to, that other nuns want to get to, and I think what I love is that she doesn't even really argue it too much, because I think she knows in her heart that that's true. So I think that's a really good moment.
It's a slow discovery of how much latitude she really has between compliance to the church point of view, or the church approach to healing and giving, versus her own, and how unreconcilable it is. There's probably that glimmer of awareness from the beginning that they see things a little differently. It's more about learning that you can't reconcile the two, and it's a larger schism than she realizes.
And I think it is laid out very subtly in the beginning. There's one really, really subtle moment that I love towards the end that is a callback to the beginning, where, you know, in the beginning there's this scene where she is like running in because she's late for something, like she's late to attend to whatever it is that she has to attend to at the novitiate. And then later on, I took note of this because one of the natives ends up stabbing a nun because she was like trying to convert him, essentially. And fair. But Sister Luke just like runs through the hallway again. And then right before she gets in the room, she stops herself and walks into the room very smoothly. It's just like this really small moment that I think is a good example of the kind of subtleties in the film itself and in her performance, where it's like, even in an emergency situation like this, they are taught to carry themselves in a certain way. And that's something that's ingrained in her, even though her better judgment would be to just like run in and help this nun. She has to stop herself and just calmly walk into the room. It's a very, very small moment, and you might not even pick up on it on most watches, but I just found like there's something there in the richness of her performance that is more complex maybe than it appears on first glance. Like, it's just one of these performances where you could tell that the actress completely thought about every single aspect of the character in every single scene. But at the same time, it doesn't feel forced.
Yeah, she's such a natural performer, too.
Yeah, exactly.
Thinking back a little bit on, you talked a little bit about the makeup, and as much as this even existed, particularly in large studio productions at the time, I started to kind of like percolate in my mind or think about the idea of what did like the finger quotes de-glam performance look like at this time of, filmmaking and movie going, you know, because would this have been, obviously to us, it's just a performance, but at that point, like with the makeup stuff, she is like cutting her hair on, or having her hair cut on screen, which, like, you know, one of the original cutting your hair on screen performances, G.I. Jane, Eat Your Heart Out, Natalie Portman, Eat Your Heart Out. Like, could this have been perceived as a version of that at the time, especially for, you know, probably the most glamorous actress of the time?
I think this was very shocking to see her in this light. I mean, she still looks beautiful.
If
let's
nothing
be
else,
real.
Let's be perfectly clear.
But still,
stunning beauty at all times.
Yes,
but it's also a very sweaty performance.
She is
I love
sweating
a sweaty
lot.
performance.
And not in like the metaphorical sense. Like, literally, it's very, very wet. It's a damp performance.
It's very humid.
Well, she is in the Congo sometimes. So, actually, speaking to that, I really like how you see just how quickly her sort of disposition changes when she's in the Congo. And it's hard not to think about Audrey herself and just her own humanitarian work that she did with UNICEF. And you see this footage of her as an activist and all the good she did in the world. And it just sort of comes so naturally to her. And I think she kind of shows that passion here and the warmth in these scenes where she's just like getting to know the natives and maybe not understanding everything, but sort of finding common ground in her own way and just, you know, actively listening to them and brightening their days and all that stuff, which, you know, there's complicated feelings on that, but
it's her, though, it maybe helps sand some of the colonial edges of this movie.
That's what I mean.
That I think are definitely there. But I mean, again, to your point, like, she has such a legacy.
Yeah. And I think you can sort of just see that passion that she has just in those scenes. I think that's the happiest she is in the entire film, is when she's just hanging out with the natives in the Congo. So by the end, I do want to just touch on the ending again. She makes that decision that it's finally time for her to hang up the habit, as it were, and she makes a
decision to leave.
Yes, very that. And she does get a bit of resistance, though, but she's given the opportunity to leave, and she does. And that final sequence of her just silently taking off her outfit and putting on the civilian clothes again and walking out the door. There's no music. There's not like the swelling strings or anything. We're just watching her in this continuous shot, it's very striking. And I would say it kind of does beg the question, like, where does she go from here? Like, how does she cope with all of these experiences that she's gone through and try to find some better life for herself? I don't know.
Yeah.
Free of those
limitations.
Exactly. And I think, for as relatively low key and sort of sedate the film can be over the course of 2.5 hours, I do think the ending is really the part where that understated approach is the most effective. And this is part of what Audrey wanted to change about the ending originally, where at first it was supposed to feel like a little bit more of like a dejection that like she essentially failed at being a nun and now she was going to try to do something else with her life. Like that was it. Mm-hmm. But that she didn't feel that that was the main takeaway of the novel and what the film should end on. And was kind of able to convince them to provide a little more of a feeling that this character would go on to find whatever mission she wants to embark on and could maybe even still carry that sense of like, spirituality with her, but she'll just sort of channel it in a different way. Mm-hmm. And I think that's absolutely the right ending. And again, really perceptive about how to strike the right tone to not make it feel like a failure so much as like, this is a story of this part of a woman's life, but it wasn't totally for nothing.
Yeah. This is also probably a good point to bring up in relation to the movies we're going to be talking about. Is it the Legion of Decency with this movie?
The Catholic Legion of Decency. Yes.
Obviously, in terms of censorship or ratings, the precursor to the MPAA of like ratings designations and the impact that it would have on film's distribution and reception, and that it's all of course run by the Catholic Church, so it's filtered through a certain religiosity, that this movie was deemed okay by them because it's like, well, she fails as a nun, and it shows that not all people are good enough to be nuns, and that is okay, even though it shows basically that she, in their mind, shouldn't have questioned the church, or like wasn't good enough to not question the church. It's interesting that like this fairly otherwise innocuous movie that like I don't think anybody would have been like, you know what, I'm gonna leave the church because this movie convinced them so much that the church, was bad or like not to
I
be
have
questioned.
become radicalized by the nun story.
Exactly. I too have been radicalized by the nun story.
Yes.
Audrey Hepburn.
Her legacy. Yes.
Yeah, I found that to be very funny that they would even have anything to say about this movie, but I suppose anything having to do with the church, you couldn't have shown it, with their certification basically in anything but the most positive light. So, interesting, very interesting.
Yeah. And I guess that's one thing that's even more brilliant about the ending is that some people could have that perception that by the end she did. Some people just aren't cut out for it. And this is what happens when, you're a little too questioning of things. You just get burnt out and you have to move on. But, I did read a little bit more about the nun story, that there was a little bit of criticism from certain, for lack of a better word, nun advocacy groups. I don't even know what officially they were.
The nun lobby.
Right. The nun lobby.
Tired.
Had some things to say.
Lobby. Wired. Nun lobby.
Wow. Yes, I'm thinking of the Benedetta campaign again. Mary. Ugh. Anyway, but I think they said something about how they felt that it made the church and the sort of novitiate of everything look bad and look too strict, and that it wouldn't convince enough people, essentially, that this is a right way of living your life. So it's kind of like
anyone else
it was on
could
both,
have an
both
answer
ends.
for something.
Right. So a little bit of controversy there for again a fairly, I would say, innocuous film. But Yeah, I don't know how much that would have factored into voting for her or not in the end. We'll maybe discuss it, but I think we should probably move on to our final film before we get to our winner, because there's two to talk about here, shall we?
Honey, speaking of controversy.
Oh, girl. Let's get into it. Okay, so Katharine Hepburn and Elizabeth Taylor for Suddenly Last Summer. So I think it's very appropriate that we began this season talking about double nominees of the same film, Anne Baxter and Bette Davis, and All About Eve. And now we have the next instance of that happening here in the season finale. So that's very poetic. And
with the same director.
Exactly. We love that poetry. And we once again have an older star and a newer star, and also both of them losing. So, at this point, both Katharine Hepburn and Elizabeth Taylor are very in demand. Both of them are red hot as far as Oscar standards. This is Katharine's 8th nomination, her 4th from this decade alone, and this is Liz's 3rd nomination in a row. And I think you can see why both of them always just sort of wanting to challenge themselves creatively. From what I understand, they've always wanted to push themselves further, would want to take on Suddenly Last Summer, which is yet another Tennessee Williams adaptation here in Best Actress in the 1950s. It's pretty much like what biopics are to the 21st century. Tennessee Williams adaptations are to the 50s in this category. And this is one where it's once again centering on a woman, in this case, 2 women. We've got gay themes, groundbreaking for Tennessee Williams. We've got societal expectations, all the good stuff that audiences came to expect from Tennessee Williams. And the plot here is a wild one, so strap in. So as much as you can summarize the wildness of this film, I'll give you a quick summary here. So we're introduced to Violet Venable, played by Katharine Hepburn, who's a widow who lost her son last summer in a tragic accident. And the two of them were very close. They always used to go on little excursions together. They're also very rich and snobby. But then last summer, her son, Sebastian, decided to take his cousin Katharine with him instead of Violet. Katharine, of course, played by Elizabeth Taylor. And on their vacation together, Sebastian reportedly had a heart attack and died, reportedly. And this caused Katharine to snap, and she was locked away in an asylum. And Violet is intent on putting Katharine through a lobotomy so that she can never really say what happened that day last summer. And Katharine obviously fights back against this. And in between the two of them, we have Dr. Kukrowitz, played by Montgomery Clift, who takes a liking to Katharine and is trying to investigate what went down on that summer day so that he can help her, rather than to resort to giving her a lobotomy. So we will talk later about exactly what did go down. We're talking about 2 screen icons here, Chris. So Katharine Hepburn, Elizabeth Taylor. I would love to just talk, if you could just talk about your opinions on the two of them as actresses, even before we dive into these dual performances.
Listeners know how I feel
yes,
about Liz.
Of course.
Incredible icon in a way that I think sadly, as the years went on, people forgot about her and she became more of a tabloid staple in a way that was gross.
Yep.
That being said, we should all definitely celebrate every year yelling the word gladiator at the Golden Globes.
Gladiator.
I mean, she's also on, at this point, she's on a tear with the Oscars. This is 3 in a row for her.
Yep.
You'll be talking about Butterfield 8 next.
I sure will.
Maybe the less that's better. Yeah, I adore her. She, I think, I feel like she's the type of movie star and actress that, like, people forget really what, like, gifts she had in the public consciousness. We don't talk about her the way that we talk about, like, Katharine Hepburn, and they're very, very different performers, but, like, Elizabeth Taylor should absolutely be kept at that level of, like, all-time greatest. This performance is so, I mean, the text of it makes me wonder, like, if she might have been a little bit miscast, though being miscast has never stopped her before.
That's true.
It almost feels like the B-side to what she was doing with Maggie the Cat the year before, but of course pitched in a different direction. Katharine Hepburn, though, before we get to, I don't want to get too into the weeds of the performance just yet to answer your question. I mean, what the hell else can you say about Katharine Hepburn?
Right.
And like, this may make me sound like trash, but like, this is maybe my favorite Katharine Hepburn performance that isn't Summertime. I mean, like, Summertime is just the one.
Yeah, it is.
And it's just like, you could certainly have other performers at this time chew into Violet Venable's, just reams and reams and reams of psychosis and bullshit that she has to say. But there's a camp quality to this. There is a soap operatic quality to this. And, like, I really only think Katharine Hepburn could give this performance as it is, in that it's all of those things, and it's trash, but it is also a diamond. It is a gold chain covered in cheese sauce from a fair or something. I can't even come up with a metaphor.
What an image
for this.
Yes.
I'm reading Betty Gilpin's book right now, and like she is just like this brilliant writer that everything she writes is metaphor, but all of the metaphors are insane, but you know exactly what she means, and it's really rewiring my brain, so I apologize for that.
I love it.
Yeah, I mean, again, what else can you say about Katharine? I think what you can say is that she has an ability for material like this to give the material as it's meant to be given, but also to still elevate it. She can play trash as trash, but it's also prose and,
Yeah. It feels Shakespearean, what she's doing.
Yeah.
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 And really, I mean, this is such a fun watch, despite how disturbing it can get, at least for the time period disturbing, and also how talky it is, how stagey it can feel at times. I do find that it flies by. There's such a richness to the dialogue, again, for however theatrical it is, and it's very theatrical. It is just... Speaking to metaphors, it's dense with metaphors and just almost the melodic cadence, I think both of them really lend their very specific styles to that. And I think they're both perfectly suited for these roles, honestly, where we have Katharine, really leaning into the sort of cold, unapproachable haughtiness that she could very easily key into. And with Liz, I think, really having this sort of knowingness about her and really cutting through the artifice, but still having a kind of femininity about her too. So both of these roles are really, I think, in their wheelhouse, but also through the lens of this darker and more challenging material, where even though I think there's probably a clear sense of who's the hero, who's the villain here, I don't think either of them are leaning into that too much, in the sense that, like, yes, Violet is what Violet is doing to this poor girl is terrible, and she has this uncomfortably close relationship with her son, but it's clear that she's really grieving and she's in denial about everything still. And there are these little cracks, I think, that Katharine allows in certain scenes of vulnerability that are these really nice, delicate touches. And then with Liz, her character is just like the victim in all of this. But there are also these moments where she's like taunting her family or she's like referring to herself as insane in the beginning, and she has kind of a bit of a temper. So she's not entirely like this sweet Doris Day type of girl next door per se.
Yeah. Okay, she's like verbally attacking her family, but her family is also awful at the same time. Like, to follow your point, like, yes, I think the mastery, the power of Katharine Hepburn is that she can take this monster caricature like Violet Venable and make her a human being. Not only makes the performance interesting, but makes this a movie that has endured. But Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the family because we talk about Liz and Katharine when we talk about this movie, but we don't talk about Mercedes McCambridge, and Mercedes McCambridge is monstrous in this movie. She is so good, but this like awful woman who is like has this veneer of sweetness and concern, but is absolutely like the cockroach of the family encroaching upon the car crash, you know. I mean there is so much humanity in what Katharine Hepburn is doing in this movie, down to her absolute delusion and the kind of insecurity almost that Violet has, you know, the way that Violet is not just protecting her son's legacy, I guess, at this point, and you know, maintaining the discretion of her homosexual son, but also preserving her own, and makes us question, is it more for the times and, you know, keeping face for what her son was, or is it more about herself, and how much of that does she even realize? And that's a tricky thing to play, particularly in the tone of what Suddenly Last Summer is, and still be able to offer both sides of the melodrama and the actual, like, human drama.
Right. Yeah. And it's remarkable that she's able to give you that humanity, especially after the way that she enters the film, which I think we just need an entire segment on. Which you alluded to at the very beginning.
4 hours, right, to just talk about the most iconic movie entrance of all time.
Listen, it's the season finale. We got to go out big, right? The most extraordinary entrance in cinema history.
I mean, like, I called it an elevator. It's not really even an elevator. It's more of like a human dumbwaiter, because it's not meant for anything more than her to transport.
Yes, and for her to give monologues while she's not even on screen yet. You can hear her from above, like God. Yes. I'm surprised that I haven't seen that in other things. Somehow this didn't inspire other things, unless I'm not thinking of something.
It just as a visual image, it says almost everything you need to know about Violet Venable, because it's not like, it's rickety. It looks like it's built off of bones. Like, as she ascends it at the beginning, at the end of the movie, it's almost, you know, completely terrifying. It's you know, you imagine her going to and from a completely dark room with all of the curtains drawn, or like some type of cave, you know, where she goes and she hibernates until her next visit from the doctor. Like, it's so good.
Yeah. And something I didn't think about just from my previous watches is that it does have a little bit of DNA of what Gloria Swanson is doing in Sunset Boulevard. There's a little bit of that there, of someone who's just kind of in this creaky, huge mansion, and someone who, when they interact with the outside world, just has such a alien-like distance from humanity at this point that I just find really entrancing.
Well, and she spends half of the movie in her garden, whether she's, you know, giving a tour to Monty Cliff, or like that's where the climax ultimately is, though.
Yes.
The climax of this movie kind of breaks the time-space continuum. We'll get to it. But, like, you think of a garden, especially a garden in a mansion where you can have, like, lush, beautiful, whatever, topiaries. And instead of having, like, sunshine, open-air, space, light, what Violet Venable's garden, or I guess you could say Sebastian's garden, too, because she associates it to him as well. It's, like, there's skeletons out there. The plants look like they might conceivably eat a human being. It is dark. It looks like...
There is a Venus flytrap, so...
Right, like, I'm sure that some homosexual at, like, Universal Halloween Nights or whatever it's called one time said, you know what we should do? We should do a Suddenly Last Summer haunted house that is just her garden. You could do that.
Yeah.
It's...
a surprising amount of skeletons in this.
Surprising amount of skeletons.
Yeah.
It's, like, the like the fountain is gross. Like it looks
everything
like,
looks overgrown.
Yeah, it's overgrown. It's mossy. It's probably smells kind of rank, and it has barely seen the sunshine in a long time.
Yeah, which again, it feels like it's paralleling with Violet Venable.
Well, and the other thing about the kind of specificity of her home is that, Violet Venable is basically selling herself like she has been devastated by the death of her son and everything has happened. The turmoil that she's going through, and by extension, you would suggest, that person's home environment happened then. But it's like, no, you've clearly lived like this for a long time. Your son's death hasn't made you this person. You have always been this person.
Exactly.
It's incredibly fun, but also very morbid and revealing on an entire character level.
Yeah. I mean, that whole, whatever it is, like 30 minutes that she gets in the beginning, which is like, it feels like it's a 30-page monologue that she gets, is incredible and is, again, revealing so much just in the way that she carries herself and the way that she speaks about her son and how they got along famously and they were known as Violet and Sebastian. It wasn't Sebastian and his mother. It was the two of them, like, as partners, sort of whenever she talks about her niece, sort of suggesting that she accused an elderly worker of sexual assault when it was actually like she who was being obscene around him. It's this whole thing, but you just see how she wraps him around her finger in a sense of really appealing to just like, I'm just an old grieving woman and she just wants to have some peace of mind. And then she goes off on that big story about seeing birds devouring sea turtles on their trips together. Which is normal.
Totally normal conversation. That's what we were talking about before we got on mic.
Yes, as one does.
Yeah, we've talked about this several times.
Yes, of course. But she says he was looking for something, but she stops herself. I think in these little moments you see where she knows what her son is. She's like, I know what you are. And yet,
she is the white dachshund.
Yes.
Well,
but she won't actually say it. She can't bring herself to say it.
Well, as she's crafting this narrative too, it's like, and Hepburn's playing it in a way that you can both conceive that she is aware, or the delusion is so much so that it's like she steps up to a word and she realizes the word is too much to say.
That's it.
Both for her personal realization and for this narrative she's constructing, and she backs away from it,
Right. And for our narrative purposes, it's fitting. Yes, to string us along about what exactly is happening here. I will say on a rewatch, it's obvious, but it's also very enriching to watch this a second time and realizing what may be layered in the reason why she stops herself in certain sentences. So, but yes, they go inside and it's like Katharine's mother and brother are inside, and again, the Mercedes McCambridge character's there, and there's such contempt between them, saying that, like, she clearly told this guy, Katharine's brother, that he could have Sebastian's clothes, but it was in a weak moment. She's even like mocking their southern accents at a certain point. I love it.
We talked about Pillow Talk as a great comedy nomination. Suddenly Last Summer is not a comedy.
Yeah.
It is a very funny movie.
It really is. And it's like she tells the Montgomery Clift character to sit in Sebastian's chair and to make her laugh because it makes her stop wanting to cry. And it's just, he's really laying it on so thick. But you also see how quickly she tries to change the subject to him, like, performing the lobotomy when he asks her about the day that he died. And she's like, oh, it was just a heart attack, and just very quickly, like, ends it there and changes the subject. It's
Garden
so
variety heart attack for my young, healthy son.
Yes. My fit and great son had a heart attack at, I don't know how old he was supposed to be, but pretty young. She really just bodies this whole 30-minute scene, and then it's just like, okay, I'm done, and now it's Elizabeth Taylor's turn for her 30 minutes. It's a fun structure.
Quite. And the shame of it is they don't actually get to interact that much, which is like kind of the thing you want from the movie.
Yeah.
And it maybe goes back to the kind of tricky adaptation of what this is, because the stage one act is it really is just kind of like these monologues shoved together. And the movie, the kind of stumbling blocks for the movie is how it opens it up in a way.
Yeah.
But the scene ends and then it jumps straight to Elizabeth Taylor in this insane asylum / kind of nunnery, where she is not a nun. But like they have a library, what insane asylum has a asylum library.
Yeah.
And I think the idea of, because we are introduced to Katharine through Violet's telling of her.
Yes.
So, this narrative that she has constructed about Katharine, she's not just doing it for Monty Clift's character, she's doing it for the audience as well. So, I mean, through a modern lens, especially when you're watching it, maybe knowing kind of what it was. The first time I saw this movie, I knew the gay legend, I knew the cannibalism legend of it. You're maybe meant to be questioning her more at the beginning than I think we probably do when we watch it. But I don't think Elizabeth Taylor's performance kind of betrays that. She is very still and quiet when we first meet her, so that you could almost, whatever you already think about her, you could project onto her.
Yeah.
And then, quickly she's with Montgomery Clift and is, kind of feverish to be understood and to tell her story, which she doesn't really know what it is, because she's kind of amnesia'd it out, because if there's not enough campy things in this, there's also a little bit of amnesia.
Why not?
Why not? Tennessee Williams is like, I'm gonna give the gays everything they want.
It really is that. Yeah. Except an actual actor as Sebastian.
Yes. Not that I feel like Elizabeth Taylor is bad, but I do think maybe someone who we don't recognize immediately as this movie star can play a little bit more of the expectations of this role, that, maybe if it was a less, super famous, less super gorgeous performer, we could maybe have a more complicated relationship with Katharine between audience and performer. We could have more of a journey with that. Instead, Elizabeth Taylor, for us, is just given these wild monologues and trying to dodge a lobotomy. That's very, very fun. But, we're always conscious that we're watching Elizabeth Taylor in a way that isn't as exciting of how conscious we are of watching Katharine Hepburn in her role, if that makes sense. I think.
That's very true. And it's something that we spoke about a little bit when we talked about Joanne Woodward in The Three Faces of Eve, who was very new and a breakthrough in that performance, because there was a hope at one point that would star Judy Garland instead of Joanne Woodward. And I was just talking about how I feel like that would have been quite distracting. And just the fact that the audience already has so much baggage with Judy Garland compared to a Joanne Woodward at that time, where people really didn't know her very much at all. We got to know this person. We got to develop a relationship with this character through this newer performance that lended itself strongly to probably why she won that. And I sort of agree that if there was a newer star in this role, that probably we would be able to mold whatever we want onto it instead of focusing on like, oh, this is Elizabeth Taylor, who is incredibly famous in the tabloids at this time.
That way, in the way that like we celebrate this movie today, maybe you could only do less of that if that's true. But for the like story to function as it wants to function, maybe somebody else could have positioned that in a way that like you can have a direct comparison. In just the previous year, another nominated performance, Elizabeth Taylor in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, another Tennessee Williams, where it's like that star power absolutely serves her playing Maggie the Cat, you know. And in this one, we don't. It's almost a limitation in going on that journey with Katharine, which of course none of this is to say any negative towards the performance, because I think it is a good performance in a way that's almost just like you feel bad for any actress who has to do it, because by the end of the movie, when she like the whole story with Sebastian comes out, she has to have this massive monologue also while playing the flashback too, because you know you have these we're seeing both at the same time. We have the spotlight on her face telling the story while we see her living the story in the same frame. It's like she basically has to hurl herself into this panic attack as this story comes out of her in a way that like there's shades of it. Like every performer sobs the same way. People have made a joke out of how Julianne Moore sobs in movies. But, like, I think it's true of every performer crying on screen. They always cry the same way. Like, her sobs when she can't get her words out in this movie are the same somewhat as Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. But I do still think that she's really, really good. I just think you maybe don't cast a movie star in that role.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, it does make the two performances just feel like equal, like heavyweight performers, even though Elizabeth Taylor isn't that, you know, she's not like fully a veteran by this point, but it still feels like these two titans sort of going up against each other, which does speak to your point that maybe that's part of the appeal. But yes, in terms of assessing the performance,
I definitely think it's revealing in what the kind of intentions were behind this adaptation, you know? Not I mean, how much story is there to tell? And it's super salacious, especially for the time. So it's like you're not wrong to make that like Titans in a ring creative decision in casting this. It's not the wrong choice to do that. But at the same time, I think it shows that as a production, they didn't maybe know what to do with this material, but, you know, adapting Tennessee Williams for the screen, all of which his adaptations, the original productions, of course, but in terms of the limitations that they had in the movies, made all of the Tennessee Williams movie adaptations popular, controversial, prestigious, you know, films and adaptations. And this is kind of the end of them, if I'm correct. Was Sweet Bird of Youth after this?
Yes. That is like 62 or 3. 2.
And I mean, like, obviously it's the most controversial. It's the one that it seems like the creators seem to think that they had to make the most cuts or, you know, use reference or use euphemism rather than, you know, saying the text as it was, which a lot of Tennessee Williams texts are pretty euphemistic anyway. But I almost feel like it's the most explicitly saying what's going on of all of Tennessee Williams's adaptations.
It definitely feels like it when you're watching it. Like we're allowing more and more. We're chipping away at the production code, so that's exciting.
Which, if there are any listeners who haven't immediately shut off this podcast and ran to watch this movie because they haven't seen it yet, maybe we should say what the actual story is
Oh boy.
of Sebastian's fate.
Shall we? Oh boy. Well, before we do that, I just want to note a little bit more on Liz's performance, because I don't think I personally talked about it that much.
I took too much time away.
It's okay. No,
Please.
You're good. It was a good tangent. I think her best moments are in the beginning, when she is in the asylum and she doesn't have the makeup and the hair that she gets when she moves to the other facility. Or she just is like, oh, you just look like Elizabeth Taylor. We all know and love her.
Yeah.
And the clothes and everything. Yeah. But in the beginning, I love that she's kind of playing with expectations and talking with the doctor and saying like, oh, it's because I'm insane after all. And it's like this very knowing kind of performance. And, you know, the whole thing of her just blocking out all the horror of what happened that summer. And she's thinking of the tin drums and the music. I think in those moments, she does convince you that she's experiencing that kind of like a trauma, if you will. But then, like I'm saying, like, you know, as the film goes on, I do think the film kind of the performance just has to become louder and louder and louder and more histrionic, to the point that we have that climactic monologue that, for better or for worse, I mean, I don't know what you think of just her telling of the story and just how the superimposing of her in extreme close-up with the flashback right next to her, how you think that plays out for her. I think it goes a little too over the top, personally, but at the same time,
I think the flashback is more over the top because, like, her acting of like, no, I can't wear this bathing suit. No, it's very Kristen Wiig. Don't make me sing.
Oh, God, a little bit. Don't make me wear this bathing suit. Let's just talk about it. You know, the big revelation of what went down. So we find out that Sebastian was trying to lure some local young men on vacation by having Katharine wear this swimsuit and then go to a local bathhouse with the men and presumably have his way with them and sort of pay them off, I guess. And then one day a bunch of guys ganged up on him and chased him through the streets and started, essentially tearing him apart and perhaps resorting to some light cannibalism.
It wasn't on his kink playlist, but that's what they chose.
Yes. So, really wild stuff here. Again, I think she does go a bit over the top in her delivery by the end, and just like her screaming out when she sees it all happening in the flashback is a lot. But yeah, I think she sort of modulates the actual telling of it well enough with like her pauses in between that it does kind of work. And then of course we have Violet, who's just completely shell-shocked, and it just snaps something in her brain to hear the actual truth of what happened to her son.
Mm-hmm.
So
what a nice time at the movies.
Yes.
Wholesome, uplifting, gay content. It's almost so much that like the revelation is so huge, and this movie has to have like the denouement where, you know, we realize that Violet has fully snapped and will not ever align with reality ever again. And like the cozy idea that like, but Catherine's gonna be fine, like and not lobotomized, is absurd, to the point where, you know, this one of the iconic images of the movie is as they are devouring him, as Katharine says, you know, and the horde has enveloped Sebastian, but we see the giant hand reach up and then slowly descend again. The movie should end with that image. And that should be the revelation. Like, if you're going to be this shocking movie, why not just leave the audience with that? Because that's ultimately what this material is trying to do. That's the effect it's trying to give. But, you know, constraints of the time. This is where you actually feel the constraints of the time. Just like, we were talking with the nun story, is it almost doesn't matter what you say or you show. It's how you resolve it and what is the ultimate lesson from it. And I'm not quite sure that there is a lesson here in the way that, they maybe thought there was in the nun story of, like, she's not strong enough to be a nun or whatever.
Right.
I guess the lesson is you gotta tell the truth even if it's bad. I don't know.
It's, you can't repress these things. You just have to confront them head on. How about that?
There's in terms of this revelation, there's a reason why gay people love Suddenly Last Summer. It is so extra. It is so fun, to the extent that the movie or the play takes it seriously. In the audience, it's very difficult to. But I think the performers take it seriously.
They commit to it.
That is kind
Full
of
force.
the alchemy you want in watching this movie,
Yeah, I think so. And just speaking to the actual content itself, it's a rather unfortunate that, to go back to the production code and everything, part of the reason why the censors were sort of okay with this story being told pretty much with fidelity is because of what happened to Sebastian. And the fact that we have this gay character, which, production code would rarely ever allow, the idea of not only a gay character, but a gay character actually, like, pursuing his pursuits and whatnot. The fact that he is very much punished at the end was part of them allowing the content to be as is.
Well, and the almost more insidious thing is their suggestion that Sebastian is presented as those people are. I'm paraphrasing, but that's what it is. And Sebastian is not just a gay man. Sebastian is a rapist.
Yes,
so
that too. Right.
The suggestion there is they believe all gay people are just rapists. So that's the insidious thing about it.
It's a really gross element behind the scenes that, for as fun as this could be to watch, by the end, it is just very glaring to read things like that happened only 60 years ago in film. So, yes, I don't know how this would be handled nowadays, per se.
Well, and I don't think anybody would even think that way nowadays, that it's just like, well, the gay man got his comeuppance in this movie.
Right.
It's like, no, the rapist got his comeuppance in this movie. If, like, not to throw us further into the weeds, but, like, if Katharine's story is even to be believed. Like,
that's true, yeah.
It's interesting because, yes, they probably threw more regards in, like, you allow cannibalism because it's a reaction, or it solves gayness in this movie.
A little bit.
And then just give Katharine a happy ending-ish. And it's fine. You can make that movie.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tricky territory to get into, especially when we're talking about the production code. But just to sort of end on a note about the performances, I think really great ending, obviously, for Katharine Hepburn. She thinks that the Monty Clift character is Sebastian now and is sort of just in her own reality. Not unlike Norma Desmond, not unlike Blanche Dubois at the end of their movies. And, it's this ironic twist of fate, I think, that I don't think the movie necessarily comments on, but I do think is quite clever, where Violet is the one who is more severed from reality than Katharine and might actually, like, need a lobotomy of her own at some point, perhaps. I don't know. Not saying that I endorse lobotomies, but just, like, the yin-yang of it all is interesting, whereas Katharine is now way more well-adjusted, walking into the sunset with Montgomery Clift. Finally, she's purged this from her system, and who knows what she'll go on to do. But yeah, it's a fun reversal that I enjoy.
Yeah.
Anything else on Suddenly Last Summer?
Great spooky season watch.
It is very appropriate.
not to call it elevated horror. It's not elevated horror. The
Elevator horror. Katharine Hepburn.
Yeah. I think the insane asylum scenes are kind of bad, but that's maybe the thing that makes it feel most like a horror movie. Yeah, I'm gonna watch this 1,000 more times in my life.
Good. Shall we move on to our big winner?
Yes.
All right. Simone Signoret, Room at the Top. So we have another instance here of an actress winning on her first nomination, which happened quite a bit this decade. Judy Holliday, Shirley Booth, Audrey Hepburn, Anna Magnani, Joanne Woodward, and now Simone Signoret. And I think it's also somewhat of a similar narrative as Anna Magnani, in how Simone Signoret was a French actress who made a name for herself in her home country in French films. She had done a lot of French films. She became somewhat of a star in films like La Ronde and Diabolique. She was actually kind of typecast as the other woman, as like sex workers, kind of earthy, dangerous women, you could say, which is more or less what she's also bringing to Room at the Top. And I have to say, I love that we're ending this season with a discussion of Room at the Top, because I think it's such a natural bridge between the 50s and the 60s. Just in how, like, it's about relationships between men and women, like commenting on class system, social structure, but really like pushing the boundaries into a more sexual frankness, like allowing the main character to be very unlikable and wrong and an anti-hero. And so I think we'll come across a lot more of these kinds of morally gray characters in films as we go into the 60s and beyond. So this is just a nice tease for next season, you could say. So let's talk about it. Room at the Top, it's about this guy named Joe, played by Lawrence Harvey, who comes from a sleepy hometown to a new town for a new start. He has big ambitions, and he wants to just raise his social stature, and he falls in love with a woman named Susan, who comes from a rich family, which he's also having an affair with an older married woman named Alice, played by Simone Signoret. So it becomes a love triangle, and Joe has to decide who he wants to be with, and you know, who he wants to be, period. Something to think about. So our big winner here, Simone. Chris, thoughts on Simone here and her Oscar-winning performance?
You know, it's not too far from the type of role that we've seen in... It's more so like the type of role you might see a supporting actress win
100%.
for. But I do think that there is she's very understated in a way that I didn't expect, given what the framework of what that role is and how it's really not her story, it's someone else's. So you might expect, you know, the waterworks to start at some point or something like that. But she really kind of underplays a lot of it in a way that is surprisingly dynamic. I found her to be the most interesting thing about the movie. In a way, it's almost sad that she won because it's the one that's most clearly about a man, the story that's most clearly about a man in the four movies we're talking about, because it's so much, very much his story. And I was like, there's something so antiquated about this movie. But then I was like, oh God, no, we're still making this movie constantly. It probably is much less willing to let the lead male off the hook as similar films and similar recent films. But yeah, I was really impressed by her. I, of course, knew her from Diabolique, but I haven't seen much of her before, whereas the others have seen a bunch, and they're all massive movie stars, like we've already talked about. So maybe some of it was I was just so curious about her as a performer watching this movie, having fewer frames of reference. But I do also think you could see at this time a different performer going in there and giving a completely different performance, that she almost she throws things away, but it's also loaded at the same time. Like, I love the moment where she's talking about how she's too old to wear a girdle anymore, and she doesn't care about wearing a girdle. That scene, and I was like, this could have been some, like, someone could have played it like a real broad, you know, or and she just kind of has this weight to the way that she presents her character's life that isn't quite dejected, but has made peace with, I think, her standing.
Yes.
And by the end, what's so tragic about Alice is that it feels like she is a woman who probably made peace with the terms of her life, but then got that one thing that she maybe wanted to want, and we see that break her heart in a way throughout the movie that's just entirely underneath the surface of Simone Signoret's face. That was really compelling to watch and made it not at all a surprise to me that she won.
Yes, I completely agree. And it was really interesting watching all of these movies this past week because I saved this one for last. And watching a lot of the other performances, I was like, it's kind of a surprise that Audrey didn't win or that Liz didn't win. Even Katharine has a super Beatty role. Doris Day was so popular, I could have even seen that. So how did this other actress who was way less known than the other four end up winning this over all of them? And then I watched this and I was like, oh, she's just that good.
Yeah. Well, she's that good. It feels like a lot of them, even if there's a performance or two I personally like more, you could see how it was a fairly level playing field. I mean,
yeah.
I think probably the thing that held back Suddenly Last Summer for both of its performers is the kind of incendiary...
the subject matter, right.
Yeah, the just... not even just the subject matter, but the tone of it, that it's like...
Yeah. Both.
The type of thing that would get nominated, but it's maybe too much to win.
Right.
But yeah, like, it totally makes sense that she's a winner. I feel like because it's a level playing field, you know, this first-time nominee, who audiences still would have been familiar with, was Diabolique a foreign language nominee?
I don't know if it was.
I believe it was at least popular in the States when it was released, but so it's not like she's an unknown entity. And...
Right.
I mean, I think we've seen it before where a lot of star wattage opposite each other, you know, can cancel each other out, and then
I have
someone who
example for this
goes right down the middle.
Yes. Something that I thought of, which I think isn't a perfect match, but I think is a particular win that you enjoy recently. What I would compare this a little bit to is Olivia Colman winning for The Favorite.
I mean...
in the sense that Olivia Colman was certainly acclaimed by that point, known by a fair amount of people, but I don't think quite had the mainstream breakout until The Favorite, in America at least. And she swoops in and wins that Oscar over these homegrown favorites, Glenn Close, Lady Gaga, you know, who were thought to be frontrunners at different points in the race. But I think sometimes voters just value an actress who comes a little bit out of nowhere, and I do think that's a little bit the case here with Simone.
And like Olivia Colman, she was also in a Best Picture nominee.
Yeah, that won a Screenplay Award. Yeah, so I think...
I wish I had more to say about the movie itself. It felt very much like a movie we have seen many, 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 many times. I mean, the thing that I thought was most striking about it, aside from the fact that it, you know, ultimately uses the protagonist as kind of a cautionary tale for, you know, your behavior and stepping over other people, especially for men. The idea that he basically kind of sells her up the river for very quickly and for directly his own personal gain. You know, he's sleeping with Alice, she's married, and her husband's like, I can get you into business. Literally, I think he says, I can get you into business.
Yes.
If you never speak to my wife again. And almost with little hesitancy he does, you know, because of the vague concept of business. I was struck by how easily he does that and how the movie set it up that he makes that decision fairly easily with intention of it being on those circumstances. Her character, at least, again, I feel like there's a certain level that we've seen that character a lot too, but I don't think we've necessarily seen it that often in the way that she plays it, in a way that's not huge, is not very broad. And like the tension of the performance, right, is kind of the restraint that she has, the feeling that she is holding back, that she has a lot that she's not quite saying, even if she's someone who does speak up for herself.
I think she takes a part that could be very cliche. The idea of the other woman, the mistress, the whore and the Madonna whore complex, right? And she's transcending that and is giving her humanity and a wisdom about life. Yeah, what I love is how much confidence she gives to the character and a respect for Alice, but not in like an overt sort of, I don't know, Mae West type of way. Like, she's
and also not in a pretentious way too. There's so
Right.
many ways to like overplay this and overwrought it. Like there is a real confidence in just in not having to project so much of what she's doing at all times in a way that I think
very easy to her.
Yeah, a lot of modern performers don't have that confidence, and it's like not only do they perform the thing that the character is doing, but they're also performing it in a way to be like asking the audience, do you get it? Do you see what I'm doing?
Right.
There's I think there's confidence in that I really appreciated.
Absolutely. I think really just even from the first few scenes, she is reflecting that this is a character that knows a lot about life, has been through a lot, and how life can bring you down and people can disappoint you. She knows all of that, and she communicates that really well just in how she carries herself, her facial expressions, how sensual she is. And she never really makes her into the joke or the two-dimensional character or like a pity party even, despite all of the shit that she has to go through from her husband, from Joe, and all his weird like conservative baggage that comes out. And even though, again, yes, the film isn't really about her, very much centered on Joe, I do still walk away feeling like I understand and sympathize with Alice the most of anyone here because of how she's able to infuse such a warmth and a weird kind of magnetism that isn't, again, really asking for anything. You're just drawn into it, and a reality to the role that, yeah, I mean, I think this is a great example of like exceeding what is on the page.
Because, not to pat ourselves on the back here, this movie isn't really pitched at people like you or I. This is pitched at, the bad men in the audience who might behave the way that this protagonist behaves. So at least we have... Otherwise, it would be like, well, why are we here if we can't at least, get more to her than the protagonist does, right? We have to feel more for her.
Yeah, and again, it's not just the fact that I'm solely having to focus on her because of our purposes and our discussion here, but I really am just like, whenever I watch the film, I mean, I've only seen it twice now, but both times I watch the film, I walk away being like, I completely understand why she was thought to be the standout.
But Lawrence Harvey got a Best Actor nomination for it, which kind of looked askance at that when I saw that. He's perfectly
decent.
fine.
Yeah.
We should also maybe say, like, for the movie, there's a certain sensibility that felt new and fresh. This
Very
is
much
considered
so.
part of the British New Wave. So, like, in a way that maybe to our modern eyes, this movie doesn't feel like on the pulse of anything, but at the time, it would have been
Very
felt
much.
that way.
It feels urgent, I think, and it feels like it's directly commenting on the stuff that's going on in the 50s, again, between men and women, and just like norm cultural conformity of the 50s. And asking, is the whole thing of you're like a working class guy and you find this rich girl to marry from a rich family and you've, upped your social standing. Does that make you actually happy? And that's the whole thing at the end, which is very like proto The Graduate, the final scene, which I did find to be a very, very good and satisfying ending because I didn't necessarily want to see this guy happy in the end.
No.
So, I'm like, you got what you deserve.
Truly it would be like, why are we here?
Yes.
Yeah, all of that. And I think the kind of sexual frankness of this movie, it feels chaste to modernize, and it doesn't have, like, we've talked about the Legion of Decency. It doesn't have the extremity of Suddenly Last Summer, obviously, but it also doesn't feel like they're pulling any punches. It's very chaste in terms of talking about sexuality, an extramarital affair, also the sexuality of the young relationship too, and that leading towards a marriage, but never like it's not pulling any punches, but it doesn't feel like, I don't feel like it's avoiding or using euphemism or visual euphemism in the way that so much of this era does, but it walks a really fine line that would have existed at that point.
Exactly. One scene that I want to comment on specifically for that as well is probably her best scene in the film, which is they have one of their post-coital moments where she asks him if he would have liked her if she was in fact 10 years younger, like the same age as him. And then that spirals into her revealing that she once posed nude for an artist, which just sends him into a rage.
Yeah.
The idea of, like, in his mind, her selling her body for a man. But she very reasonably argues that it's her body. She knows what she's doing. He doesn't get to dictate what she does with her body. And also it was a long time ago anyway, so it doesn't even have anything to do with him. And I love the way that she is arguing her points in this very even-keeled way. And obviously it goes to these dramatic heights, but she's so assertive and so confident, and there's no insecurity, no self-doubt at all about her decision to do what she did, which again isn't even all that bad and really doesn't have anything to do with him, but he's so bothered by it, and it becomes like this breaking point for them. There are so many ways that scene could go wrong, or stereotypical, or something we've seen before from whoever is playing Alice, but I think she finds a very naturalistic pitch that is perfect for the style of film that it is and for the character to honor her sense of dignity in a way. I love that scene for her.
Absolutely.
At least. Obviously there's the whole mess by the end of Joe having to go off with Susan because he got her pregnant. So it's like this, again, complicated triangle, and he's having to have this very difficult conversation at the end with her. And the way that she just tenses up, you just know that her heart is just breaking. And she's throwing all these different excuses at her, like how she never could have gotten divorced from her husband, that they were always just good friends anyway, right? Like, and you see in her face that she knows he is not being fully sincere. And she even notes that, like, yes, you've gotten everything you wanted, but, like, to what end? Like, why are you trying to be with these people who are phony, who have bad morals? All you have to do is just be yourself and you would have been happy. And he just keeps giving her the same excuses, and it's just like wearing her down, and you feel the impact of how devastating this is for her, how this was really probably the last thing she was holding on to, because her husband is not all that great either. So, like, both of her options are bad at this point. So what is she gonna do? So I think,
well,
yeah, I know.
We can guess. Unfortunately.
Yes.
Tragically.
Yeah. But again, I think she is so magnetic in a way that I really haven't come across in just doing this show in Best Actress and providing, again, a newer kind of style of acting without going to histrionics and in a character that is cliche in many respects. And as you're saying, a story we've seen before, but is showing these new layers that I think is, something that we've been talking about a lot, is just the idea of when you award good acting, it should be for the performance and what they do with a character when it's not as strongly written. Like, as in, if it's a really compelling character, it's like half the work is already done for you.
Mm-hmm.
And with a character like this, I think it's exponentially harder, but she makes it work.
No, I totally agree. And you also have to kind of wonder if, especially the sexual politics of this movie, if a vote for her is also a little bit of a vote for, because you're supporting her and her performance as the tragic character, a vote in support of what its stance was in modern sexual politics too.
I could see that.
To be a tad cynical about it.
Yeah.
But I do think that she's great. And like you mentioned, like new styles of acting as well, because especially in melodramas of this era, I think her performance style of this movie would have felt fresh and new. Just the type of realism that she brings.
Yeah. Well, I think this is an excellent transition point where we can actually talk about why we think Simone did win this award. And just to talk about the precursors, for as much as they actually matter in 1959, probably not as much, but still is something that doesn't hurt. We had Audrey Hepburn winning the Best Foreign Actress at BAFTA, which may have been after, but she also won the New York Film Critics Award. Elizabeth Taylor won the Golden Globe for drama. Simone Signoret won the BAFTA, and she won at Cannes, and she won at the National Board of Review. So Katharine Hepburn and Doris Day did not win anything before the Oscars. I don't know if they were really considered as much in the race compared to the other three, per se. I don't know if you disagree, but it feels like it's probably between Simone and Audrey and Liz.
I would definitely agree with that, especially because the nomination streak that Elizabeth Taylor was on at the time.
Exactly.
Which I'm sure you'll have more to say on your next episode. Your first episode of the season of the 60s.
Yes.
And it also definitely gives power, especially in Best Actress, to the nominees that are also nominated in Best Picture too.
Yep. So Audrey was. So there you go. Suddenly Last Summer, I mean, I don't know how much that film had support overall. Pillow Talk had a decent amount of support. Obviously, winning a screenplay award is pretty big. But, I think this is a race where probably all five of them had at least a little bit of support. I think for Doris Day, maybe the nomination was the reward. I don't know if it's really the role that wins Best Actress very much. And with Katharine Hepburn, she's on her 8th nomination now, and she's in a film where I don't know how much we really talked about this on that when we talked about the film, but I do think that Elizabeth Taylor is really more prominently the lead of that version of the film, of the story. So I think...
I mean, she gets the full climax of the movie, too.
Right. So I think Liz would probably take precedent of the two of them. And Audrey had already won an Oscar, so there's that. But she's also showing a new side to herself. But why do you think Simone ends up winning here? I mean, we certainly have talked about it a little bit, but is it just she had a different kind of style? She was a fresh face. They like the film.
I think it's... I think she's the best thing about her movie, which never hurts. At least that's my point of view. I think it's the Best Picture thing that she is in a Best Picture nominee. And I think it's a conglomeration of all the other, I mean, like when you're putting a vote down on a ballot, you're not just considering every performance in a vacuum. You know, they all kind of exist with each other. And I think a lot of the things that you just mentioned about those other performances help to cancel those ones out. And then Simone Signoret is still left standing. I mean, it's ultimately completely unsurprising after watching all these performances that hers is the one that won.
And again, it is unfortunate that it is so much of a co-lead situation, but it's still a credit to her that she was able to rise above all these other nominees who were so much at the forefront of their stories.
Yeah.
And I think
it's very Patricia Neal.
It's giving Patricia Neal for sure. But I also just think that this is, again, a style that voters were finding themselves more comfortable with after we had Anna Magnani and Joanne Woodward and even Susan Hayward to a certain extent, who is certainly like more of that studio system kind of actress, but in a film that is grittier and more unconventional. I think this is the sort of new and exciting style that appealed to voters, perhaps. So that all of that really helped her. And again, to go back to it, I think just the discovery factor is something that is huge, and I think is something that is still probably a factor today, especially when it comes to like Best Picture. I don't think voters always love being told what to do or told what is the front runner. So as much as the media might push forward like, oh, look at Audrey in this very daring new mode, here's Elizabeth Taylor in her most huge, you know, over the top performance yet, and on her third nomination, these two different narratives going on. I just think it's like Simone Signoret just had the stuff to back it up, and she was new and exciting, and that's why she won.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, no baggage, too, because Only Last Summer has the baggage of its content.
Yeah.
Audrey Hepburn has the baggage of having already won and in that decade, and then Doris Day has the baggage of how seriously did people take the movie.
Exactly. Well, I think we can get to some Twitter questions if you're up for it. We got
Love it.
Quite a few, so we'll probably go by these pretty fast. This is the end of the season, so people had more questions than usual. We'll start with some Simone here. Fritz said, "Is this the most unusual winning performance so far?" In terms of sexual frankness and, again, sort of underplaying the role, I would say it's pretty unusual. I would have to think if it's the most unusual.
I would have to say maybe in a vacuum, but like we're talking about a time period where performance styles were shifting, different like styles of movie making and different, you know, narrative techniques, different, you know, way stories were told, whereas at the beginning stages of a transition. So I think in that context, probably not. But like in everything that's led up to it, probably.
Yeah. Well, the question is so far, so I think probably yes. Yeah. Dark Shaka said, "Let's pretend Room at the Top had an American actress playing the protagonist."
Ooh.
I think that's, well, technically the protagonist is Joe, but I think they mean to say recast Simone Signoret as an American actress.
Right.
Who would you cast considering 1950s Hollywood? So I did come up with an answer for this because I saw these questions ahead of time. I'm going to go with a deglammed Ava Gardner.
I like that answer. My immediate reaction was she's probably too young, but like Shirley MacLaine, because I think Shirley MacLaine does a lot of things well at this time period that Simone Signoret does.
That's very true. Yeah, she could play
too young.
The heartbreak of it really well.
Yeah.
Jim said, "Is this one of the best actress years? Not just in the 50s. 5 fabulous performances here. Maybe not one of the best ever, but certainly in the top like 30 or so of best ever, I would say."
I mean, the worst performance in this category is still pretty great, and like that's not always common. There's no obvious worst either.
Not a stinker in the bunch.
There's probably better, because there's probably lineups that not only have all great performances but also have better movies.
Right. There's
universally.
That. Yeah.
But yeah, it's a pretty good lineup.
Yeah, we're ending pretty strong here. So for Doris Day questions, Christoph said, considering how huge of a star she was, would you expect Doris Day to have more career nominations than this one, or was she too popular for the Academy to fully embrace her?
Oh, my answer feels like such a bummer.
Oh, go ahead.
Because I do feel like this is we should be so lucky to have this one, considering what normally gets nominated.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because nothing leaps to mind that they might have otherwise.
Maybe Love Me or Leave Me, I think, is one that most people cite. But I just think they considered her more of a movie star than an actress.
Right. And you just didn't have people getting nominated for the types of movies she was doing.
Yeah, predominantly the types of movies she was doing, right? And it still feels like there's a bit of a line there sometimes, even with today's Academy, with certain actresses or certain pop stars turned actresses, perhaps. Anyway, Emily said, what's your favorite costume Doris Day wears in Pillow Talk? Because that wardrobe is fire.
Ooh, the blood red gown that she wears, that she also has a matching coat that's the same fabric.
Yes, I think we're thinking of the exact same one. I love that. It's the leopard print hand warmer muff that she's got.
Yep.
And the hat to match. I think I literally said wow out loud when I was watching it. I was like, that is a look. She served a lot of looks in this. Fritz said, would you have nominated Rock Hudson for best, and parentheses, and hottest actor?
Well, obviously we would nominate him for hottest actor. No question.
Yeah.
I mean, without broadly looking at the whole field, I mean, we both kind of looked askance at Lawrence Harvey. All due respect to Lawrence Harvey.
Yeah.
So I would say, under those circumstances, absolutely.
I think so.
Otherwise, I would really want to nominate Rock Hudson for this, because as much as we didn't really talk about it in this way, but those performances are really a duet,
Absolutely. Can't have one without the other. Yeah,
exactly.
I felt the same way about The Awful Truth when Irene Dunn was nominated and Cary Grant was not.
Right.
They hate when an actor is hot and funny. A male actor. They just get jealous.
Yeah, this is why Channing Tatum has no Oscar nominations.
I think we should have that conversation.
Yeah.
Audrey questions here. We got Ronaldo Sosa, who said, what other actress from that time period would you have liked to see play the titular nun in the Nun story? Well, we got a question about Gene Simmons that I'll get to later on. I think definitely her would be a good option.
Okay.
I mean, Lord knows Deborah Carr's put into work by now.
Carr, but
right?
Deborah Carr could, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe that would be repetitive. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking to some recent nominees that I've been talking about, I maybe think Eleanor Parker could maybe do it.
Interesting.
Would be interesting to see her, and then have her have it switched around with The Sound of Music and her playing the Baroness. Just saying. Emily said, if Audrey had done Room at the Top, do you think she also would have won?
No.
She never would have done it. Let's just get that straight.
She would have been miscast in it, but I ultimately think the big limitation to Audrey Hepburn not winning for the Nun story is her other Oscar.
Yeah.
Considering that was such a huge financial success and its nomination tally.
Fritz said, is this Audrey's best work?
No.
For me, it's the best of the 3 nominations that she's received so far, but I'm not going to comment on that until we get to the final Audrey nomination. But Chris, if you have a feeling on it, do you think this is her best work?
No. Unfortunately. I mean, listen, unfortunately I'm trash, and I do love her in My Fair Lady. I know that some people will be coming after me with pitchforks, and I'm at peace with that. I mean, I mentioned it earlier. I do actually love her in The Children's Hour, a movie
Yeah.
I am in absolutely no rush to watch again.
That's a tough watch.
Well, I mean, and speaking again to her as a physical performer, I think when the horrible thing happens in that, her actual like physical response is like something that has been burned in my brain ever since. That like maybe that's my answer because of that moment.
Really, yeah, that's.
But also, I love that Roman Holiday Oscar. She's so wonderful.
I would have voted for her that year. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yep. Not a very good lineup, but still, I would have voted for her.
Right.
So some Katharine questions. Is Katharine Hepburn's entrance in Suddenly Last Summer the best character entrance ever? That's from Eric Maxwell Bruns. And yes.
I mean, probably unrivaled until Jennifer Lopez in Hustlers.
Yes. Which is the person I was referring to as pop star turned actress.
Exactly.
Yes. And yet, where was that nomination? You've already covered it several times, so don't need to get into it.
I cover it every day of my life.
You do.
When I have
That's part
a
of you
free
putting in the
hour,
work.
I go on street corners.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you ask people to come into your fur.
Well, actually, I just went to the Academy Museum and I threw a can of tomato soup on the flower dress from Midsommar and then glued myself to the floor.
Wow. That was you?
That was me. Yeah, I know that the like Twitter videos blurred out my face and such, but I just want to lay claim to that.
Thank you for revealing that here live for the first time.
This is what I do for Miss Lopez.
Yes. Christoph said Katharine Hepburn made only 7 movies in the 1950s and received Oscar nominations for 4 of them. In the 60s, she would make only 4 films with nominations for 3 of them and wins for 2. Did making herself rare increase her chances at nominations?
I'm not really arguing with any of her nominations in those periods.
Yeah, I'm not either.
So, I mean, could she have made some stuff that would not have gotten her nominated? Maybe?
Yeah.
But I don't know if... I feel like those are performances that still would have gotten her nominated, even if she was working more. So I don't know if the fact that she did so few movies contributed to it or not.
Yeah, maybe not. The only other example I can think of is like a Daniel Day-Lewis situation in that like a Katharine Hepburn performance feels like an event.
Right.
You know? But yeah, she would probably get nominated for all of those anyway, so... Christoph said, this is one of my favorite Kate Hepburn performances, but still this question has always been nagging me. Could Bette Davis maybe have been an even greater choice to play Violet Venable?
That is a good thought experiment.
I'm going to be brave and say no. I don't
know
if I would have felt...
brave and say she's less right for the role, but I would love to see it.
I would be interested in that interpretation. I just feel like I wouldn't have felt the vulnerability of it that Katharine brings to it. But who knows? I mean, she's she's capable of vulnerability. I'm not saying that Betty's not, but I feel just like the brittleness of that character more with Katharine. Fritz said, would Kate be pushed in supporting today?
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. And she would have won.
I mean, probably Simone Signoret would have as well.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Huh. That's an interesting alternate history we could do there. Who knows who would win, and who knows who would take the lead spots. So, Christoph said, is this the best Katharine Hepburn nomination of the decade, or was that Summertime? It's Summertime. Yeah. Period. It's my favorite of her nominations.
It's
so
my
far.
favorite of her performances, period.
Well, okay, there you go. Owen Daly said, Battle of the Hepburns. Better performance, better film. I think both cases I lean to Kate and Suddenly Last Summer.
I agree as well. Is this the only time they were nominated together? That's so fun.
Wait, actually, no. I forgot about 1967.
Oh, right.
Yes, which is when Katharine actually won for Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and Audrey was for Wait Until Dark. Yeah. So Greg Adams said, if you were to give Suddenly Last Summer the Star is Born treatment, who would you cast in those 2 roles in the 30s, 70s, and present day?
Oh, wow. Okay. The 30s is hard because They just did not talk like that then.
Well, no.
What,
Yeah, it would be
what
heavily
does Suddenly
sanitized.
Last Summer look like if it's made in the 30s?
I don't know. I can't even imagine
I mean, obviously Sebastian's not gay. He's
Nope.
like a thief or something.
Yeah.
And like they helped him steal.
Mm-hmm.
And he wasn't eaten. He fell off that cliff.
Yes.
Disney style.
Right. I love that.
Okay, so
Who would be cast? So, I thought of Agnes Moorehead for the Violet part. I don't know if she's still too young for that, but
maybe. Elizabeth Taylor is much older than she would have been at the time, but like I do think that this is maybe somebody for that time might have been more appropriate, and you could say Judy Garland.
Sure.
If it's late 30s.
Right.
It's late 30s.
Yeah, we'll say it's late 30s. Sure. I was also thinking of Vivian Leigh. I don't know. That's a tough one. I think for the 70s, Anne Bancroft for Violet.
I mean, especially if we're going the Star is Born route where we have to cast a pop star.
Okay.
Or some type of musician. You could say Liza.
Liza. I just said Julie Christie because she was popular in the 70s.
That's true. Or Faye Dunaway. Faye Dunaway probably would have murdered several small children to play that role.
Yeah. And also on the set.
Yeah. See, the 70s version of Suddenly Last Summer, Katharine instead is killing all of the children that are chasing Sebastian.
There we go. What do you want to do for present day?
Okay, so we have to have a pop star.
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that the rule?
I guess. Well, Jessica Lange for Violet Venable.
I mean, that's like a gimme. Yeah. Jessica Lange and Sarah Paulson.
Jessica Lange, no, we can't do this. We cannot have Ryan Murphy Suddenly Last Summer.
I know.
And for that reason, we have to cut Jessica Lange. So I'll just say Glenn Close because she could probably do the vulnerability of Violet better than Jessica Lange. Anyway,
Glenn Close and Lady Gaga.
It's Glenn Close and Lady Gaga. Perfect.
This is the vehicle that I've been looking for. I've been wanting to cast the two of them as co-leads in something, and this is it.
There it is.
Wow.
We got there.
All right. I hope people are picturing that, whatever mental image that is. All right. So
I would not want to see the press tour of Lady Gaga for Suddenly Last Summer.
That would be a lot.
Yeah, I studied cannibalism, witnessed cannibalism.
Firsthand. Wow. Best Picture cast said, what's the best Liz Taylor performance she didn't get nominated for?
Oh. I mean, what didn't she get nominated for?
Cleopatra.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, Liz Taylor scaled some heights, but also Liz Taylor did have some bad work.
Mm-hmm. Giant. Place in the Sun.
Giant's a pretty good gimme.
Yeah. Reflections in a Golden Eye.
Oh.
The Flintstones. Same thought.
We got there together. Yeah, I'll say Giant. That's fine.
I think she was mostly nominated for her best performances. Mostly.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Let's get to a few general questions here. Ayrton O'Brien said, is this the widest gulf between subtle acting and most actressing ever in this category? I mean, it certainly does run the gamut. I don't know about ever, but there's a lot of different styles here going on.
Well, and I think you feel that distance when you also have performances that are good and bad in either direction, too.
Yeah. That's very true. Owen Daly said, who, if you had to cast another co-nominee in another role, could be the most out there choice?
Of this year.
Yes. I mean, the most out there, as in it would never happen, would be Katharine Hepburn in literally any of these other roles. But as far as, like, within reality of, like, this would be an out there choice, but, like, an inspired choice, like, something that could realistically happen, I guess, like, Doris Day and Room at the Top. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's reasonable. And, like, because it has those Graduate vibes, I mean, Doris Day was someone Mike Nichols wanted for that movie.
That's right.
Though I think it gets erroneously put as he wanted Doris Day for for Mrs. Robinson, and I believe it's that he wanted her for for Benjamin's mother. I don't know. Let Katharine Hepburn get laid. Put her in room at the top.
Wow. That would be really something.
Why not?
Yeah. Andrew Carden said, should Juanita Moore be here for Imitation of Life, or was her supporting push appropriate? I don't know if you've seen Imitation of Life, but...
I have.
Okay.
I mean, the egregious, like, the ones that I would maybe rather put there, and probably it's because Juanita Moore got the supporting nomination, though, like, as a lead distinction, I would get that. I mean, I more so think of Marilyn Monroe and Dorothy Dandridge as, like, surprising that they're not here. But sure! I love Imitation of Life. Why not?
I think she's a co-lead, and I do think I would nominate her here, so...
Yeah.
Owen Daly said, who would you knock out in favor of Juanita Moore had she been properly placed here for Imitation of Life? I mean, I would, I might kick out Doris Day. Sorry. I'm sorry.
I mean, that's tempting. I don't want to be like, we just said nothing but positive, because I do think that there isn't a bad performance here.
Yeah.
Or one that doesn't justify a nomination, but it might be Simone Signoret.
Oh, wow.
But I like Juanita Moore in that movie more than either of those, so have your pick.
Okay. Well,
let Simone Signoret and Juanita Moore swap. How about that?
Perfect. No notes. Love that. James Byrne and John Anzalone want us to talk about, of course, Marilyn Monroe in Some Like It Hot, and whether we think she deserved a nomination here, and if she deserved to be in lead or supporting.
I would put her in lead. I would probably give her the win.
Yeah. I think I would also be in the winner discussion. It's tough. I would have to think about what the combination would be if she was here. But yeah, she would be in my top 1 or 2 if she was here. She's great, and put some respect on her name. Dark Shaka said, in your opinion, why did Lana Turner fail to get a second nomination for Imitation of Life? That leads very well into the next question, which is from John T., which said, do you think the Johnny Stompanato trial cost Lana Turner a second Oscar nomination? So we didn't talk about it on the 57 episode when she was nominated for Peyton Place, because it technically took place after that nomination and that ceremony. Just to get into a brief summary for people who don't know, she was involved with a mob guy, Johnny Stompanato, who often abused her, and her daughter actually stabbed him after he was abusing her mother, and it was a big media sensation, big trial. So I maybe think there was so much baggage there that I don't know, like, they wanted to touch that for a nomination. But yeah, I mean, on a good day, I might nominate for her for that too. Just overhaul the whole lineup, put in Juanita Moore, Marilyn Monroe, Lana Turner, it's just an embarrassment of riches.
What we're
this
really
year.
advocating for is that Best Actress gets expanded to 10 nominees.
Yeah, this is part of your advocacy.
Yes.
Let's see. Emily said, need to throw a bone to my girl. So Gene Simmons, most famous / employed in the 1950s, but never got an Oscar nomination during it. Why do you think that is? Who would you have nominated her for if you'd seen her performances?
I am Gene Simmons deficient, so I'm going to defer to you.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine. I mean, I don't really know either. She'd already been like a nominee from the 40s for Hamlet. She got one more nomination in the 60s, but she was booked and busy. She was in Guys and Dolls, The Big Country, Angel Face. I haven't seen Home Before Dark, but a lot of people mentioned that as a big snub, so perhaps for that. Fun question here from Cinema Sex Kitten. 1959 saw the release of Sleeping Beauty. Cast these 5 actresses in a live-action version with the roles of Aurora, Maleficent, and the 3 Good Witches.
I mean, the temptation is too good to not have Katharine Hepburn be Maleficent.
She's Maleficent.
Yeah.
No question. Aurora's probably Audrey.
Yeah, just temperamentally, but it feels weird to put Elizabeth Taylor as a Flora, Fauna, or Merryweather.
Yeah.
I think she's probably Merryweather then.
Yeah.
And she gets to just have the fun.
Yes. She's a little bit disgruntled.
Doris Day is once again the straight man.
She's the leader.
Yeah.
I like that. A few more general questions. These are more directed at me, but you can answer some if you want to. Fritz said, what are your favorite and least favorite winners this decade? Favorite winner for me is Vivien Leigh, and least favorite would be Ingrid Bergman, sorry to say. I don't like Anastasia.
It's not a good movie. Vivien Leigh for myself as well. I'll say that's fine for Ingrid Bergman, though I haven't seen all these winners, unfortunately. Though I do want to put some respect on Judy Holliday's name. I like Judy Holliday a lot.
Good win. Really
I
good
know
win.
a lot of people talk crap about her win, and she was hated by a lot of other actresses.
Yeah. Well, Fritz said, if you can switch one winner this decade, who would it be? This is very easy. I would switch Grace Kelly for Judy Garland.
Yeah, no question.
Fritz also asked, you could have one tie in this decade. What would it be? I think I know that we just said that about Judy Holliday, but I would tie Bette Davis and Gloria Swanson in 1950. or tie Judy Holliday with one of those two, and I'd be happy. Three-way tie.
Let everybody, except maybe not Eleanor Parker, win that year.
Yes. There we go.
Including Judy Holliday. I know that it is not a cool win, but it is still a good win.
Yes. Very good. Okay. Jim said, rank your top 5 best actress performances of the 50s. So I did have to write these down just to make sure that I got all the ones that I wanted. And then he said, do the same for the worst 5, which was also fun. I'll go with my best first. My number 1 is Judy Garland in A Star is Born.
There you go.
Groundbreaking. Number 2 is Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard. My girl. Number 3 is Bette Davis in All About Eve. All 3 unimpeachable. My number 4 is Katharine Hepburn in Summertime. And my number 5 is Rosalind Russell in Auntie Mame.
These are good answers.
Thank you.
I do not have a full list prepared, but I do know that Katharine Hepburn in Summertime would be the number 1.
That's fair. Yeah. And for my worst 5, I'm sure people will love hearing this. I'll go 5-1 for the suspense.
Ooh.
My number 5 is Susan Hayward in With a Song in My Heart. Very boring. My number 4 is Leslie Caron in Lily. I just can't with that movie. Number 3, I have Julie Harris in The Member of the Wedding. Very poorly modulated for the screen. My number 2 is Maggie McNamara in The Moon is Blue. Go on, girl, give us nothing. And then finally, my number 1 worst nominated performance of the 50s, Jennifer Jones in Love is a Many Splendored Thing. Boring, racist, miscast. I hate it.
I don't vibe with Jennifer Jones.
Neither do I.
Jennifer Jones I've seen.
Luca said, to bounce off of that, what is the worst nominee of the 1950s and which actress could replace her in whatever role it is? To recast that Jennifer Jones character, I think there's one obvious answer to play a Eurasian character, and it's someone who's already been nominated for an Oscar in the 30s, Merle Oberon.
Fantastic.
Period. We got one more, sorry about that, from Fritz. Any non-nominated performances from this decade you would like to highlight? Well, we just did with Marilyn Monroe, certainly.
Sure.
And also her for Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and Jane Russell. I
was going to say Jane Russell, one of my favorite performances.
Mm-hmm. Debbie Reynolds in Singing in the Rain, I love. Julieta Messina for La Strada and Knights of Cabiria.
Good answer.
Deborah Carr in Tea and Sympathy. Jane Wyman in All That Heaven Allows. There's quite a few. There always is. Okay, so I think we're at our final segment here, where we will discuss who we think was the runner-up to Simone Signoret. Chris Feil, what do you think?
Audrey Hepburn.
Oh, that was very quick.
I mean, the Best Picture thing is quite significant. I mean, like, and also just the performance itself. The movie hinges on her so much. It's such a star vehicle, and I think she kind of is incredible in it. It is very much the type of performance. The only reason that person didn't win is they already won, and semi-recently.
Yes, Audrey Hepburn, the film was certainly beloved. She was doing something new, and she was playing a character that is on the good side between, like, really good types of characters and really bad types of characters in this lineup. So I think, yeah, probably Audrey. And now the other question is, who do you think you would have voted for from this lineup?
I would have voted for Katharine Hepburn in this lineup. She is perfection. She's the moment. I mean, like, it's the performance that we definitely had the most to say about. It's the performance that, like, this is the one that I've certainly seen the most, along with Elizabeth Taylor, but is constantly surprising. I think she knows exactly what the material is and delivers and exceeds on it. Yeah, and I think a lot of it goes back to beyond the bigness of it, the kind of what is exquisite about it. You spoke so well to the vulnerability that she has in this, and I think surprisingly, of a whole Best Actress lineup, that it's a performance in this grotesque thing that still has that level of vulnerability, is why I would vote for her.
She would be my number 2, I will say. So I can't disagree with anything you said there. I would actually vote for the winner.
Fantastic.
I would vote for Simone Signoret. And I think it's because, once again, she is elevating the material way beyond what is asked of her and doing something different and feeling effortless while doing so. And that is something that I've found just from doing this show that I very much value when I'm thinking about who deserves a Best Actress win, someone who goes above and beyond. And I think she does. And I think if I'm a voter in 1959, if I'm placing myself there, I would definitely see myself being like, ooh, Simone Signoret, this very interesting French actress who's come in and showed all these Hollywood stars what's what. And so, yeah, I think I would have been swept up in the Simone Signoret wave. Simone Hive, rise up. Chris, thank you so much for joining me on this fantastic episode. If I do say so myself, you brought the takes.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I really do appreciate it. I love our talks together, and tell the people where they could find more of you on the internet.
My name is Chris Feil. You can find me on Twitter and Letterboxd at Chris V Feil. That's Feil. You can also follow my podcast, This Had Oscar Buzz, wherever you get your podcasts, and on Twitter at had_Oscar_Buzz.
Yes. Highly recommend This Had Oscar Buzz. I'm sure people who listen to this already listen to that, but...
Well, fingers crossed. We are very silly, and we have a good time.
That is, both things are very true. Yes. And I was lucky enough to be invited on to a Stranger Than Fiction episode one time.
Great episode.
Which was really fun. Well, thank you all so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson. The show's at Oscar Runner Up. Instagram at And The Runner Up Is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you liked what you heard and want to hear more, go to patreon.com/AndTheRunnerUpIs, where you can find a whole bunch of bonus episodes. And that's it for the season. Can't believe we're already at the end of another season, but thanks to you, Chris, and to all the other guests who joined me this year. I will be back in January, where we'll start covering Best Actress of the 60s. There'll be a few bonus episodes in between to tide you over, but if you want to get a head start on the next main show episode, we'll be covering 1960, where the nominees were Greer Garson in Sunrise at Campobello, Deborah Carr in The Sundowners, Shirley MacLaine in The Apartment, Melina Mercouri in Never on Sunday, and Elizabeth Taylor in Butterfield 8, with the winner being Elizabeth Taylor. So with that, thanks again, Chris.
Thank you so much.
And I will bid you all adieu.
we ascend up into the ceiling.
Yes, mumbling about Sebastian.